Hey everyone, in this episode, we are super excited to talk to Father Mark Mary from the CFRs about their new book, Born of Fire, that really helps men dive into Lent.
In this episode, we dive into who are the CFRs,
Mm.
what their formation process looks like, as well as our identities,
Yeah.
just as men and women, as children of God, as we learn how to trust the Father and how we do that within the context of Lent, within the context of struggle and suffering. And there's just so much in this conversation. And so we are really looking forward to sharing it with you coming up next. Thanks for joining us today, Father Mark Mary.
Yeah. So, could you give us a little maybe background into the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal and their charisms and a little bit about their formation process, which I think kind of fed a lot into the publishing of this book.
Sure, Drew and Katie, it's great to be with you again. Thanks for having me back. And so, Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, for those who don't know, we are a community of men, Franciscan community. For the most part, we were founded in the Bronx, New York, in 1987, and all 8 of our founders were formerly Capuchins. A couple of them are fairly or have been fairly well known. Father Benedict Rochelle and Father Andrew Apostoli, in particular, through their work on EWTN and writing and all that sort of stuff. And well, since we were started in kind of the South Bronx back when it was really a tough area. There's a movie actually made about the precinct right next to us called Fort Apache, and the idea was at that time, just with the crime and the violence and all that sort of stuff, the drugs, whatnot. Like it was just a really rough area. And but that is where Franciscan vocations and men and women, like there's something about that poor kind of rough soil which is perfect for us. And so at this point, a little over 30 years later, there's about 140 of us. We have 15 different friaries. We have a couple in Europe and Central America. We just opened out in Oakland, California, New Mexico, and then the Northeast. This about a year ago, it was one of our founders was consecrated a bishop. So we have our first bishop from our midst, and
That's cool.
which is really cool. We just
Yeah.
because of the whole COVID thing and his own responsibilities, we just had the massive Thanksgiving with him with our community
Awesome.
last week, and so it was to see kind of the Episcopal cross on the gray habit. It's just
Yeah.
it's cool. It's fun. It's cool. Yeah, it's just this beautiful community. I really love it. We live together. We pray together. It's about 4 or 5 hours of prayer. We're really kind of serious about our communal life, which is probably one of the things that we really press into the most. And we try and live amongst and serve the poor and evangelize. And it's just I love it's a community of, like, I would say, like, passionate men, of men who are really on fire for the Lord and really committed, and we're fighting, we're in it together. So that's kind of my understanding of who we are. And then I guess a little bit, you were asking about the formation as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, so there's a journey to kind of get to our door and to be welcome into what's called postulancy. We don't necessarily have to go into that too much, but the first stage of formal formation with us happens in Harlem, New York, which is where I live, and it's called postulancy, and that's about a 10-month process. And right now, like the journey from, if you will, the world to religious life, to normal life to religious life, I think that gap keeps getting bigger and bigger. And so postulancy is really geared towards responding to and helping the men in that transition. And so we just, to be like, I think our postulancy is incredible. We just put every resource at their disposal and really pour into these men, particularly the human formation is what we call it, which is really kind of going to be that, we use the language in the church of grace builds on nature. So really
Mhm.
getting at that nature and shoring things up and healing things, including like identity type stuff, which we can get into. So that's like 10 months, and it's just like a really kind of, it's really encouraging, loving, but like intentional 10 months. After that, the next phase is called novitiate, which is when they receive the habit, they receive the religious name, they're formally part of the community. And that's what would be like the spiritual boot camp. So it's like we had this real intense human formation, and now we're going to go really intense into the spiritual formation. And of course, all components are there in all parts. And then they make vows, and they make vows for 1 year at the end of novitiate. And after, at least now, it's like 4 years of temporary vows. You can make your final vows, which is the lifetime commitment. And for us, some will become priests and some won't. But for
Hmm.
those who desire to be priests, we actually don't send the guys to seminary, pretty much in all cases, except unless until after they've made final vows, which would be one
Hmm.
of the other
Yeah.
things a little bit unique about it.
Yeah.
So, and then that's going to be 4 to 8 years of study, depending on your previous education. And then, so that's that. The reality is like that's all a huge part, and it's a lot, but the formation never stops. And
Hmm.
so, the real work of that beginning initial formation is to uh, prepare the men, prepare us all for like this ongoing daily formation, conversion, all that sort of stuff.
Hmm. Yeah. So, and correct me if I'm wrong. So, from what I understand, when the postulants show up a couple months after that, the Father Innocent right now takes them to the desert. So, 21 days that they spend in Utah in the winter, uh, going through kind of this intense um, spiritual, physical, emotional formation. And I think it's something that I related to, especially having gone through military boot camp. And there's a lot of formational process things, a lot of breaking down so that you can kind of be built back up, a lot of testing your own limits. And so that's what something that I really kind of appreciated, and I think was really worked into this book. I'll show here. So the Born of Fire study. So can you talk a little bit about, I don't know, like maybe when was the first time that you guys decide like, no, we're going to take the postulants to the middle of the desert, and just kind of how it's informed and what they do there for those who haven't heard.
Yeah, I would. So it really. So Father Innocent, he's what's called the postulant director, and he's been that for a number of years. Before that, he was in charge of our missionary program in the Bronx. That's connected to our homeless shelter. So for 5 6 years, he's been in this kind of in the responsibility, the role of forming young men. And so ultimately, it was his call. But what I found kind of encouraging or interesting or whatever you want to call it is, a lot of us do like we do pay attention to, like, for example, like military training. There's
Mhm.
something about the type of guy who becomes a CFR who's kind of into kind of like intense things or passionate things or hardcore things, whatever. So there's some part of us that resonates with some of the military formation or kind of high level sports stuff. And
Mhm.
it is like if you look at like kind of across the board, there's something about when like men are going into something together at the beginning of it. There's this almost this like formation or this rite of passage of kind of going through a struggle together,
Yeah.
which seems to galvanize the brotherhood, but also strengthen the man. And so I remember years ago just being like, we don't really have something like that. Is there an equivalent? Because our formation is different from military formation or for athletic formation, but is there equivalent that would work for us? And this is what Father Innocent he found, and it's in collaboration with a group called CORE, and
Mhm.
CORE is a group that was kind of the fruit of Wyoming Catholic. And if you're going to go be a student at Wyoming Catholic, all of the freshmen go on this 21-day backpacking trip, and it's part of their formation. But they've developed it, and they've developed a number of formation kind of lessons for men and women of, I think, from 5 days to number of weeks. And so we connected with them, and it is, if you ask Father Innocent, like in short, he'll call it a man camp. It is about to in pretty much in any context, like to live your vocation for your lifetime, you're gonna need to be able to do hard things.
Mhm.
Um,
Yes.
in our own life, in our own vocation, you're going to need to be able to do hard things. And so part of it is just reminding the men of their dignity and their capacity uh, to suffer and to endure. But also, I kind of like to look at this whole like 21-day desert experience as like idol hunting. um,
Mm.
because there is a way in which whatever your thing is, whatever your idol is, if it's comfort, if it's isolation, if it's uh, self-dependent or self-reliance, if it's if it's heights, if it's control, if it's just comfort, whatever your idol
Mhm.
might be, it's not going to be there. It's not going to be there, and it
Yeah.
forces you to confront it and to start to deal with it. And by doing it as early as possible, to allow this stuff to come up to the surface as early as possible, it allows the men with the Lord and with Father Innocent to really sort of start
Mm.
allowing the Lord to break down some of these idols as soon as possible.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah.
And immediately, as you said that, like I thought back to my own basic training, and it's like vanity and materialism and the control and
Mhm.
like all of these things that I didn't even know were so ingrained into my lifestyle were just like gone.
Mhm.
That's gone.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's something really important about the difference, because one of the things you've talked a lot about is going into the desert in relationship. And I think, in basic training, it did help me turn to the Lord, but that wasn't the way it was designed. And there's something about going into the desert, into these hard places, and learning how to suffer and sacrifice with the Lord. And so, how do you see that manifest differently with your postulants, with
Beautiful. Yeah,
yourself?
that's a great question. And at some point, I might turn the tables on you with this interview because I'd love to hear your own experiences as well.
Mhm.
Um, and I maybe to kind of help contextualize things a little bit, it might be helpful just to explain a little bit of like uh, to put like when we're saying we're going into the desert and just like what does that actually mean?
Yeah.
Yes.
So we fly out to Moab or the Moab area, so in Utah,
Mhm.
and it's a 21-day thing, and so we're not actually just in one spot, but usually like we're in one spot doing one thing for about a week, and then we end up like moving to a different one for a different type of activity. And
Mhm.
a couple of the things that make it unique are, first of all, we do it in November, and we do it in November on purpose, and part of that is because it's like cold. It's not snowy, but
Yeah.
it's cold, and
Um,
what we'll do is we spend a couple of days, so we're like in the back country, so you throw on like your ruck with everything, and it's so that especially early on, it can be between 50 and 75 pounds, depending if you're carrying water, and we're hiking for a number of a number of miles, and then camping out, and for the whole 21 days, you don't take a shower. It's like you're in cook groups, you're sharing tents, and then we're doing things like backpacking. We're doing things like some very basic learning how to use like a map and navigate. We did some rock climbing, what they call canyoneering, rappelling, and so it is. It's part just like doing things that are difficult. It's part learning some new, which is part of a good thing for men in particular. I think
Yeah.
for all of us
mhm.
to learn some new kind of skills. But also, like all of this, every morning it begins with we have mass and holy hour. So the very first thing we
Mhm.
do is we have mass and holy hour, and that's actually when the cold's the hardest. Because right, if it's for the most part, it wasn't freezing. A couple of days, like the Nalgene's froze. But when you're it's 30 degrees, 35 degrees, and you can walk around and stuff, okay, like it's
Yeah.
maybe uncomfortable, but it's not terrible. But when you have to sit still for an hour and a half, right? By the end of that, it
Whew.
gets pretty much into survival mode.
Yeah.
Um, and so we're beginning there. We're beginning with a prayer, and we began with weeks of um, like talks, formation on the spirituality of the desert, which is this whole
Mm.
rich tradition we have in the church as well.
Mhm.
And then while we're out there, there's going to be a little word each day. There's going to be another time of prayer, and so the whole thing is it is being it's struggling, and it's having trials, which are supposed to create the space for this conversation, right? And for
Mhm.
these
Mhm.
people to process these and to relate these to the Lord. And so and there's someone else has said this, like when the Lord wants to teach us something, he doesn't just give us a lesson, he makes things happen. And that's kind
Mm.
of that's kind of this reality. It's like, okay, you want to pray, you trust the Lord. Now how are you going to understand prayer when every morning for a week you're not able to focus and it's just cold? Like like how let's look at that. Let's work through that.
Mhm.
Or how are you going to, like, what's the Lord saying in your, when you were leading and you made a mistake and you got embarrassed and you got frustrated, like, okay, what's the Lord want to
Mhm.
speak into that area? And so, like myself, there's a priest, Father Innocent, one other brother. Like, one of the things we're doing along the journey as well is like, let's check in. How are you doing? Okay,
Mhm.
where was the Lord in that situation? What's He's doing? And so it's very much part of this. Like, let's learn how to do hard things, but primarily, but learn how to do hard things with the Lord. Is what we're trying to bring
Mhm.
together.
Yeah.
Ah,
Man, I think that's so important. I mean, especially for men, in our society is so good at medicating us, at making us lazy, at
numbing.
numbing, at just getting us doom scrolling through Instagram or whatever it is, and that robs us of the potential that God has for us. And I think it also uh, it it fills our life to the point where God doesn't have any space. And to have this, I think everyone should have this experience of stripping themselves, of pushing themselves to the edge, because that's the experience I think that God can relate to you. And kind of like you were saying of it's almost not this I mean, yes, there is the academic piece in the faith, but our God is a living God, a relational God, and that's how He works through us. And I know in my own life recently, I've just been working through a lot of that. Of I know things, I know this is what I should do, I know I should trust the Lord, I know I should pray, but actually, what does that look like in communion with Him? Is what the Lord has kind of been walking me through.
You're describing the cold and therefore sometimes maybe the silence of God and like just having to like sit there through the
Mhm.
prayer in a way right now in our vocation with three kids crawling all over us. I just, it's like the first question in an examination of conscience will be like, how is your like focus in mass? And I'm like, it's terrible.
I didn't hear a
I
word.
didn't hear
Mhm.
anything. But I'm here, Lord, and I'm like trying and I'm showing up. And as you were, it's different, but at the same time, that learning to be present to the Lord, even when I feel like I'm not giving anything or really getting
Mhm.
anything. And yet, like the gift of showing up and then
Yeah.
letting Him, learning to hear Him through all of the things that have my attention, whether that's a shivering body or a 1-year-old like in my face. And so yeah, how good that is because at some point in your spiritual journey, the Lord will be quiet. And what is it to believe in God and to follow God and to listen to God when it feels like you can't hear Him? Um, yeah.
Yeah. I think one thing that this really ties into, and again, is a major theme in the book, is this idea of identity. And so, can you touch on that a little bit? I was praying about this the other day. Uh, I don't think the birds outside our house just sit around and be like, "Man, you know what? I'm really going to contemplate this Lent is my identity as a son of God," or like
They're not.
just yeah, right. And so, but I don't know, like why was that a theme that you guys picked for the book? Why is that so important for men to hear in today's day and age?
Yeah, I think it's something that we're always needing to learn and lean into and to receive and to get more deeply rooted in, like, who we are, right? If we're authentically rooted in our identity and the fullness of what that means, like, that is the foundation uh, by which we're meant to go about life and all that life throws at us, right? Um, so another way of looking at, particularly, we're not able to go through the whole identity journey with the men in the 3 weeks. In Born of Fire, Father Innocent does lay it out and take some stories from the desert, kind of as like the roadmap. But he breaks down the journey of man and the journey of men, and I really feel like we can replace the male for the female and a lot of this stuff. I think there are
Yeah.
some nuances and some differences certainly, but it's so he's like, so we start with son, then brother, then man, then spouse, then father, then mystic, and then new man. And so the whole thing, this whole journey we're on, is this identity journey. Ultimately, the maturing of who we are in Christ, and it begins with sonship. It begins with sonship. And if you look at the Gospels and you look at Jesus' own journey into the desert, right, it immediately follows his baptism at the Jordan.
Mhm.
And I think that's really important, because so Jesus goes, right, in some ways, like, Jesus goes down into the waters of baptism, and he makes these waters holy, and he hears from the heavens, right, like, you are my beloved son. And this is where it has to begin for us. We have to begin uh, by at least, so Jesus experienced it differently. He experienced it in the fullness, but we have to journey into it. But we have to begin by at least hearing the truth, or knowing on some level, like, that God is our Father, that we are His children, and that we are beloved in that relationship. So that's where it begins, and that's even part of why, for our own journey of taking of a spiritual father taking his sons into the desert, like, it's not the very first thing we do. We have a couple of months just to pour into them, to love them, to encourage them, to win their trust, because we need that foundation. We need a little bit of trust for them to follow us for what's about to come. Um, but what I love about the desert is, like, now Jesus goes into the desert, and in a certain way, like, as he made the waters holy, he makes, like, the sands holy. He makes the trials and the sufferings
Mhm.
and the temptations of the desert that we're all going to experience holy. And what happens, I think, is this: it's like, um, through the trial and through the struggle, it's like, I don't have a great analogy for it, but it kind of creates the space, and it creates the holes for the identity to even, like, sink more and more and more into these different areas. So it's like, okay, you believe that, okay, Lord, I know that you're good and that you're Father and that I can trust you and that I'm beloved. Now, how does that now I'm in this situation, and I'm vulnerable, and I'm frustrated, and I'm weak, and other people can see it. Like, okay,
Mhm.
can you, Jesus, not just in theory but in practice in this situation, can you allow me to experience and to trust, like, that you are good and that you are Father and that I'm son or that I'm daughter in this situation? And that is what I think so many of our own Lenten journey, but the trials of life come in. It's like, here is a moment and here's an opportunity to experience in this place, like, in an even deeper way, um, God's fatherhood and our identity as His sons and daughters. And it is this identity kind of struggle and experience.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. We were talking earlier about this, but I've been struggling with vertigo for about the past year. So, like, just these extreme dizziness episodes, which, as you can imagine, is very suboptimal for being a fighter pilot. And being a fighter pilot or just in the military is one of those like small V vocations. I think, like, doctors, teachers, law enforcement type jobs where it does become a little bit part of your identity. And just recently to be stripped of that, and I think the Lord has just kind of brought me on this journey of, while that was a good thing, it was a beautiful thing. I have something deeper for you. I don't know. Do you have any advice for maybe someone who is in this transition period from going from college to their job, or maybe they've lost a bit of this kind of like the smaller identities in their life, potentially for God to be able, to make space, like you were saying, for some of these bigger, deeper identities.
Yeah, and I think this is just the reality that it is, like, Jesus is the way, and that part of what He wants to reveal, and part of what it takes, is a journey. And I He gives us the grace, like, for the next best step.
Yeah.
He doesn't necessarily, like, give us the grace for the whole journey at once, but it does have to, like, things actually have to transpire. Time
Mhm.
has to pass. Things have to happen for this truth and for His goodness to like fully be revealed. And so, I think we've talked about it, Drew. It's like, this is hard. This is hard, and at this point, um, it's what he's going to do with this and how he's going to reveal his fatherhood and how he's going to love you as his son in this, we don't know yet. We don't know
Yeah.
yet. And, we're grateful that you have enough confidence of him, of the person of God,
Mhm.
that you're willing to make the next best step in faith with him.
Mhm.
That's this is what Pope Francis said in Lumen Fide, basically along this line. Like in the midst of our suffering, what we don't need is basically like an explanation or a talk or a theological truth restated. What we need is a presence that's with us for the journey,
Ooh.
and that's what ultimately what the Lord offers us on the journey. Um, isn't all the answers? Isn't roadmap? Isn't the foreshadowing of
Mhm.
what's going to happen? What he offers us is his presence for the journey, and so it's so important for us to know him and to place
Mhm.
our trust most of all in him.
Yeah. So, man, I think this is so good. I want to dive a little more into trust because this is where the Lord has been leading my heart
Yeah.
recently is on this journey of trust. And like you were saying, he said that he gives us the grace just for that next step, and that can be really difficult for a husband and a father who's trying to provide for his family and saying, but what what are we going to do? Where are we going to live? These are it's easy in theory to just trust God, right? Yeah, just trust. And you're like, okay, I get that intellectually, but how do I live that out? And I think in just my own prayer life, the Lord has just uh, been really guiding me in the sense of trust me that I'm going to be there with you, that I'm going to walk you through this, and that when the time comes, I'm going to help you make that next decision. And that's tough for me who I mean, as a fighter pilot, also I was trained to do large scale mission planning. So that's how my mind works is no, I need to know the end goal, and then I can walk back and build contingencies. Like that's how we build war plans. And so, but the God is looking at that in my life right now, at least, and just saying, no, I need you to be here with me right now and to trust that I will, when the time comes to make those decisions, that I will bless you, that I will offer that. So I don't know, do you have any practical advice for people who are like, oh, I don't know, it's easy for you to say, just trust God. But what does that look like when in the day to day? And you have to make real decisions that impact real people, a lot of real people being a 5, a 3, a 1-year-old in our house that are I'm in, God has entrusted to me. So
Mhm. Yeah, I think, right, insofar as we are speaking to like a broader audience as well, the reality is that the answers to a lot of these questions um, need to be personalized,
mm,
and
okay.
the answer to a lot of questions really actually is another question, and what we really need isn't necessarily like a next best step, like do this, do that, but just to be received and heard. And so we are going to talk a little bit, but for those who might be feeling some struggle really acutely, I realize talking at you isn't necessarily like the most helpful thing, right? Which like probably any married couple has figured out. Like I don't need you to fix it. I just need you to listen to me, right?
Yeah.
And that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
What would I say? I think there's a lot of things to say. You know, the Lord's always he's always teaching us, and one of the lessons at this point maybe is, and I actually have a follow-up question, but it's like, Drew, it's like the way in which you follow me and the way in which I lead you, it's different than the way in which you plan a mission, you
Mm,
know? And it's if you pay it's this fascinating little note which I'm very amused by or very interested in when the Lord is leading Israel out of uh, Egypt into the promised land. There's this line where it basically says like he takes them the long way because if they went another way they're going to run into another people and either they're going to get conquered or they're going to get scared and
yeah.
return. And so if you're a guide and so you have like good map skills and good planning skills and you're following Moses or you're following like the cloud by day and the fire by night, you're like at some point you might be thinking, we're going, this is not the right way.
This is
Like this is dumb, this is the wrong way, this doesn't make any sense, this isn't efficient, it's not practical. But what God saw was, if you went straight, if you went the easy route, what God saw is, if you go this way, like, it's not going to work out well for you. And so I'm going to take you
Mhm.
on this long, roundabout, extended journey, because my ways are not your ways. And
Yeah.
what I'm trying to work on this journey isn't just take you from one destination to another, but it's a destination that is actually geared towards your own transformation and your relationship, allowing you to receive me, as I really am in your life, right? So I think that's part of it, is like, sometimes God's not super, or seemingly not super efficient or practical in his
Yeah.
ways. And I think we have to surrender that, okay, maybe, and as you probably experience this as parents, right? Like, sometimes your kids just need to trust you because they don't understand why X, Y, or Z isn't a good idea, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, what I kind of want to ask is how about this? Is with your own situation, what's true is that the skill set that allowed you to be a fighter pilot for a number of years, like, that's a pretty serious skill set. So, like, in one point, like, why is it? Can you just place your confidence in, like, okay, I'm really talented and educated and all that sort of stuff. I'm gonna land on my feet and get a different job. Is there a reason that doesn't take away the anxiety or like, why can't you just place your trust in yourself or whatnot?
Sure. I think there's two answers to that. The first one is, so I entered the military when I was 17, and I've been in the military for almost 15 years. You can do the math there. Uh, and so a lot in the military, um, one of the main virtues you have to exercise is obedience, because you do have some influence on your job and maybe the plane you fly, and a little bit on where you're stationed. But at the end of the day, the Air Force just sends you where they need you, and you pack up your bags in your house, and you show up and you make the best of it. And so I think part of it is, um, using this muscle that hasn't been used. I said, like, I haven't had to make a decision in my life in the last 15 years, and so there's some pressure um, on making a decision, but also um, trying to make the decision that is most in tune with the will of God. And so I think maybe there's a pressure that I put on myself of, because this is such a big life choice, that I want to get it right. I want to do what's best for our family, for our faith to grow, and I want to do the Lord's will. Like, I truly want to strive to do that. And so when I don't know what the next couple steps are of the Lord's will, then that's hard for me, because I feel like I'm here going, God, like, I am your soldier. Like, just tell me what to do, and I will go fly into battle for you. And and the Lord has just been imparting on my heart of, like, no, you are a son, and I want you to be here with me in this relationship, and I will take care of that stuff for you. And so, does that make sense? Just like the balance
Yeah.
of I do trust in the Lord, uh, and maybe just that wanting to follow His will and not knowing it is tough for me.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, and maybe I'll ask another question. One of the, like, I have a very pretty standard wedding homily flow, and I make, like, I personalize it so it
Yeah.
doesn't feel stale. I feel like actually my wedding homily is probably my best. Um, but at the end, I kind of remind the bride and the groom in that context, right? What, like, by sacrament, by this, what happens when you receive the sacrament of marriage is, like, when Drew loves Katie and when Katie loves Drew, like, you don't just give Katie Drew, and Katie, you don't just give yourself, like, because of the nature of the sacrament, you actually give God. And so
Mhm.
uh, when you love the other, when you rejoice in the other, when you're patient with the other, when you forgive the other, when you encourage the other, it's not just like you doing it, but it's also you actually communicate God's doing it too in those contexts. Um, and that's part of the, like, the dignity of marriage, and why it's so sacred and so important, because in some part, like, you're representing to one another God, right? Your
Yeah.
sacraments of God. Um, and so I think it's beautiful because, like, in the desert, right, the way in which the Lord led was present to Moses and the Israelites was like just this presence. We're talking about this presence that's with us for the
Mhm.
journey. And I think it's so beautiful that because both of you share the faith, like how much of a help has it been that Katie is here, is this presence, and that you're not going through it all by yourself,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And it's not just Katie who's here, but through Katie, like the Lord wants you to know, like, hey, I'm here with you, and we're gonna do this together.
Yeah. 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 That's so. I mean, honestly, just having Katie and the support and the prayers and just knowing that the Lord will take care of us, that He will provide for us, and that His plans are so much better than our plans, and the road that I think is straight and the way
Mm.
probably it is not the way that God wants us, and He's going to take us the long way, but He's going to be there with us.
Oh, I there's so much in that. I think the things that stood out just listening to the two of you is this is a reminder that this is the only moment that I am at and the Lord is at, and the importance of being present
Mm,
right here in this discernment conversation in the hard. It's like when we are suffering, or even when we perceive future suffering, that like we don't have the grace for that future suffering. So like we can put ourselves into like, oh, what's Lent going to do to us, or like what is like the world turmoil in the future going to result in, and just this reality that the Lord's like, I'm here. Like as you said, like that's what we need in our hard,
mhm,
is not the theological point, but just the presence of God. And in that, to reject the lies that I think are deeply rooted in our identity.
mhm,
And that's one of the things that I like from the first week of Born of Fire and looking over it, the identity of sonship. Father Innocent starts it with, here are some lies that we hold against our identity.
mm,
And some of them are, I'm alone.
yeah,
I'm worthless. I like don't know what I'm doing. Like I have a father who doesn't love me, and this like importance of renouncing those. And I would love to hear from you, Father, from a priest, the importance of us digging in to what lies we hold in our heart
mm.
against that identity, and the power of renouncing them in the name of Jesus in our lives.
Yeah, good question. Tough question. 'Cause I'm trying to think of a good way to articulate it. The reality is that the lies aren't just necessarily like thoughts we think, but they translate into actions, right? And so, um, or into particularly I think actions, but particularly to different ways in which we stop and we hinder God's work in our lives. He has a plan and He wants to do something and He wants to speak into situations, and the lies aren't just going to be spoken like aren't going to be just kind of spoken through or contradicted or whatever just through like some words, right? But
Mhm,
actually we have to create some space and for the Lord to do that, and and that's what it's at the service of. It's at this because the Lord in his honoring of our freedom, the Lord in his respect of us as persons, the Lord in his what we'll call like his he's gonna knock at the door. Like he knocks at the door, he's not gonna break it down, and we do have to open it. And
mhm.
and it's the lies that keep the door closed. It's the lies which will say, uh, I'm not worthy, for your presence. Like I'm not, I'm not, or it's the doors that can say like, okay, this I can't do this, or it's the
Mhm,
lies that can say like, I can't forgive this situation, and if we really like allow these lies to be to dig their roots, ultimately what it does, it's just us putting like the sofa and then the couch and then the armoire and all this sort of stuff on the against the door so that we can't get to it and let the Lord in. And it's like, okay, let's little by little, it's like, okay,
Yeah.
let's take this away, let's take that away. Eventually, maybe you look through the people, and then ultimately, what we're trying to do is allow the Lord into all of our lives, and it's the
Mhm.
lies which which prevent him from coming into everything.
Yeah. And one of the things you said was it doesn't really help to talk at somebody. And what's so powerful to me in this study is the recommendation to that weekly holy hour and Eucharistic
Mm.
adoration. And it isn't filled with an hour of things to do in that holy hour, but it gives you a starting point for sure and some resources there, but also the importance of learning to sit
Yeah.
with the Lord to allow him to really be the one who takes away that armoire and takes away that couch, because I think we sometimes try by ourselves and that can only get us so far.
Yeah.
But it almost like sneaks him in the back door. It's like, okay, like let's open up the front door for me, slowly, little by little, for
Can I
you.
share maybe a fun story from the desert, which I think
Yes.
we can
Yes.
bring together
Yes.
and bring a couple of our worlds together? We
Sure.
have a postulant who he served as Marine Recon. Do you know what
Okay.
that is?
Awesome.
Right. So
Yes.
Marine
Mhm.
Recon. So he went to Ranger School, Sniper School, Survival School, all this sort of stuff. And so for him, coming for our little 21-day backpacking trip, it's like, like wasn't a big deal. and it is funny because like he I think he served as a Marine from with the Marines actively from 18 to like 22, 23, which are deeply formative years.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
like the hat, the backpack, the boots, all of it was still like what he would be having as a Marine, right? Which was fun. But he also became the guy that people were leading on or like leaning on a lot. And again, because he'd done it all before. And there's this interesting part where there's two other guys, two of the postulants, or what we call the leader of the day. And so they're kind of in charge. They have the map, they have the compass, they're choosing the route. And we had to go from A to B, and part of that involved going down this canyon. And so they're looking at the map, and it seems like there's an entrance, but if you go down the entrance, then you're going through like this forest and the brush. And so they asked the Marine, like, okay, hey, like, here's what we're thinking. What do you think? And he says, well, we would, you know, we would basically always avoid going through that type of environment for a variety of reasons. Like you just avoid that. And so the decision was made, like, let's not do that. Let's find another path down. And so we're going around this like canyon, and we were at that point. We made that decision at like 45 minutes into the walk. 4.5 hours later, we're back to the same spot because there was only one entrance. This is where we had to go. And so like we got there, and where the other guys were at for lunch on the previous trip, we got there about 8 o'clock at night. A 5 hour or whatever it was, like the 4 mile hike was like 10-hour hike. We couldn't make it to our destination. We had to camp outside. All this sort of stuff happened.
Yeah.
And I think part of what the Lord could speak into that is like, okay, you know what? You feel very confident in this setting.
Mhm.
You feel like maybe you don't need help in this setting. And so like, because we have other guides. They asked the Marine, they didn't ask the other guides for their opinion. And so like here are a couple of idols that could come down at this point, right? It's like, number one, all right, how we do things in the Marines is going to be different than how we're going to do things here. And how you
Yeah.
go from A to B in that environment, well, you know what? It's not going to necessarily correlate to what the Lord's trying to do. But also, you can imagine, to go back to that house thing where the Lord's knocking on the door. The postulant, the Marine, he's in the house. He hears knocking. It's like, hey, I'm here to help with whatever. He's like, no, don't worry about it. I got it. And that's like the lie that the Lord needed to cast out there. It's like, hey,
Yeah.
uh, don't the self-reliance or this
Yeah.
confidence in
Mhm.
this area, which that's reading the map is one particular case. But surely because of his training and his formation, like, he's gonna feel strong in many areas.
Sure.
And what the Lord can speak into that now, the truth into what could be a lie, is like, hey, I want you to be self-reliant on me and to come
Yeah.
to me
Mhm.
like all the time. And so
Mhm.
that's what part of the journey, the making things happen, the challenge, because it means something when it's like, oh, you're the guy who knows what he's talking about, but you're actually the guy who made the mistake that made all of these other guys walk for 8 hours extra. Um, but also then there's the beautiful thing that like the guides in us, 45 minutes into this thing, when they made the wrong turn, we knew that this was going to be a long day. Um, but we were along for the journey, and we were willing to walk with them and to suffer with them so that they could learn the lesson, which is this like the
Yeah.
spiritual fatherhood thing. And sometimes the Lord, he sees us and he gives us permission and he gives us freedom and he allows us to walk for a few hours with our rucks and to get lost because like he values us learning that lesson.
Yeah.
And all of this, I think it happens in the desert, but it's going to happen in our vocation in life over and over again.
Yeah. I like, but just as you guys did, the Lord walks with us.
Yep.
He sees us going, the wrong direction. It's like, okay. And then,
here we go.
yeah. And then walks there. And I think, man, something you said just really rang true of something my spiritual director has kind of told me of this idea of praying to the Lord and saying, help me to be helpless. Help me to be helpless, because that's so counter all of my training and my pride as a man of relying, of being helpless. Like that's a really, really vulnerable state for me to be in, but that is where the Lord can work through us.
I think sometimes it's easier to jump to like spouse and father and be like, oh yeah, like this is where I'm at. And especially as I look at wounds of my own childhood, learning to be a child and learning to rest in God and to trust him, like to actually go back there and let it build in a healthy way is so important. And then to even take it to the mystic and the new man in this journey is such an important part that we don't just stop in I think it's easy sometimes to recognize where somebody else needs to be helped, like for that Marine to be like, oh, you guys need help with this. Like, let me show you the way. And then to realize like, oh no, my own need for rescue, my own need for the Lord to come and save me, that's an intimate need continuously, even though it's a progress that we go through these identities. In reality, we're constantly in all of them. Like it's the journey.
Yeah. What so I think there's so much that we could unpack in this book, and I'm kind of excited because I feel like this video will be a good primer for guys, right before Lent as they are about to jump into this study. What is something that you're most excited about with the publish of the book? Whether that's I know Father Innocent has talked about kind of writing it for young college students, or or even men who are discerning the vocation to the priesthood or the religious life. And what is like something that you're really excited about guys to walk through this study?
Yeah, I think the study is great. I think Born of Fire is great. But what I love it actually because it's one part of like this whole larger sort of push we're having this Lent, particularly for young men. And I feel like this is part of the conversation and part of the resource, and hopefully get some men talking. But the best stuff is well, I'll say that, but there's a lot of else going on. So like we actually the two of the missionaries, the guys who are the core missionaries, our wilderness guides, they flew out, and so they're actually with us right now in New York. And so for our own podcast, we're going to have a 7-part Lenten series where each week we go into one of these identities of son, brother, man, etc. So I'm really excited about diving into each of them a little bit more deeply with those guys. And then we reached out to some like college missionaries, young men's groups, things like that, and our so like, hey, if we can get this thing, if you want to, we can get onto like either it's a weekly or a once a Lent like Zoom call meeting, and it's just really it's not like the Born of Fire is part of it, and maybe sort of some of the kindling or the instigator.
Yeah.
But we're kind of like fired up and really going to be, I think, diving into this conversation with as many men as possible. And I think it doesn't take. We just know that there is a poverty of men, Yeah. We also know there's an incredible war being waged against masculinity to undercut men's
Mhm.
development and maturation as men. And so this is like, okay, let's go to war, for good and for men and for their own formation, which is for the good of them as husbands, as future spouses, as future fathers, all that sort of stuff. So I'm passionate about it. I'm passionate about men. I'm passionate about helping men be men, and so yeah, I'm fired up about all that.
Yeah, I like, uh it's hard when you're thinking about, what resources you can provide to help people, and there's a little bit of a temptation, as you maybe write a book and you're just like, here's all you need, and just throw them the book. But what I appreciate about you guys is your intentionality into the relationship. And so being able for men to listen to the podcast and hear not only the stories, hear them come alive, but also hear your guys' hearts, and that relationship that you have between the brothers, with you and God. And then, yeah, just you guys being able to reach out to these young men's group and uh, just walk with them a little bit. And it's cool to see. With I know you guys are super busy, and but to still make, with what little I can, my 5 loaves and a couple fish that I can give to the Lord, like I'm gonna invest that into relationship. And I think it just speaks a lot to your guys's character and to your guys's, um, your priorities in, no, this is what is going to bear the fruit. It's not, there are so many other important things, but and I think when you look at Jesus's ministry, like, yeah, he spoke to the 5,000, but really he walked with the 12, and even more so, he really invested in the three, Peter, James, and John. And um, I think we could all learn from how Jesus did this.
Yeah, I think the diving in to small groups and like just the importance of talking through things. Like a book is powerful,
Mhm.
but even if your small group is listening to your podcast, then there is an importance of digesting that on a deeper level, expanding it, personalizing it. Even as we talked about sort of our own issues with trust and identity and discernment, that it is personalized.
Mhm.
And there is such a beauty in that. And so thank you. Thank you for providing not only a phenomenal resource for men, which
Mm.
I'm very grateful for, because I do feel like there are 5,000 resources for women and we need some for men. So thank you, in all honesty, to not water that down, to really step in that reach into that need to speak to a man's heart,
Mhm.
regardless of their vocation, because in the end, like our vocations are different. Drew and yours vocation are different, but your heart as a man is the same
Yeah.
in that need and in that desire and in that identity. And so good. Um,
Mhm.
Yeah.
so thank you.
Yeah, of
Other
course.
places that people can connect with the CFRs, with you. What else you got going
Yeah.
on?
Sure, and actually a lot of it.
Yeah.
So I'm our director of communications, and so it's like my job to like bring it all together. And
Yeah, yeah.
once or twice a year, I can do that. And so, first of all, if people want to get the book, bornofirebook.com is where you can get
Yes.
the book, and that's a great resource, a great starting spot. So we have our podcast, Poco Poco Podcast, and
Mhm.
myself, Father Innocent, a couple of the brothers, the core missionaries, particularly in Lent, each week we're going to be going deeper. And then when I was in the desert, I was able to basically take like little video from each day. And so we have,
Nice.
if you want to kind of see and come on the journey with us a little bit,
Mhm.
that will all be up on our Instagram. So it's CFR
Great.
underscore Franciscans. And so it's a way to kind of see it, see the guys, see us get like nastier and nastier and dirtier and dirtier
Just
over the
grimy.
course and all. Yeah, totally. But all of that, I think, can all of it kind of together can be a beautiful witness, instruction, source of encouragement for your own, particularly prayer and journey.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's so awesome. Father Mark Mary, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for speaking into my life, and hopefully that helps listeners who are feel like they're going through a desert right now, and need kind of that encouragement, and that's the knowing that the Lord is with them and walking with them, and that He has a plan for them. So, again, for all of our listeners, thank you so much for listening. Again, check out the book, Born of Fire. We'll leave links to all of the CFR stuff in the description below. And just know that we are praying for you all until next time. Thank you so much. God bless.